Hello, welcome to our continuing series on 1 Corinthians. And we're into chapters 8 and 10. Now, normally we've been doing it a chapter at a time, but for various reasons, which I won't go into because it's not very interesting, we're looking at chapters 8 and 10 today. And it's interesting stuff because actually the two chapters fit together very well. Now, when I did this in real life, we had a bit of a list. I had a bit of a discussion on what would you do. So I'm gonna run through a quick list now. Now I'm not trying to be hip, okay, but I'm gonna run through a thing. Some of the things I found in my house. That's kind of the way you do it. And just have a ponder. What would you do? Would you? Now some Christians, by the way, might get triggered by this, and I'm not trying to be hip or edgy. I'm too old to be edgy. I mean, look at me. Anyway, I've seen them on the internet, Christians that say you shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that, can't do this, kind of. Anyway, it's an endless list. So we're going to look at this. Now, if you're the sort of Christian that's going to be triggered at the sight of certain things, well, either change channel or I'll stay till the end and see what you think. See if you agree. If you don't agree, that's fine. As long as you love people, you don't have to agree with them. Anyway, so would you, for instance, would you drink? I mean, I'm partial to whiskey. This is a very nice bourbon. I'm just showing you that for illustration purposes, and if you wonder, well, what can I buy, Neil? I mean, that's a very reasonably priced yet decent bourbon. I can give you a more expensive list if you like. But would you do that? Would you go to a pub? Most people, certainly in Britain, most Christians in Britain wouldn't have a problem with that. Would you do that? Would you eat food from a Sikh temple? Because they have, in the Gurdwaras, they have kitchens. Would you go and eat food there? Would you take money from a drug dealer? Say a drug dealer came along and says, here's 20 quid for your church or for your charity. Would you take that? What if someone said, oh, I've got to give this person some money, 20 quid, right? Can you let it happen because I'm not going to see it? Would you spend that on accident, obviously? Would you go to a strip club? Would you go to a mosque? Would you, pray in a forest or something? How would that feel to you? I'm trying to think what else. I've got the list here. Would you wear a cross? Now, some of our Puritan forebears would say, oh, that's popery, that is. So would you wear a cross? Would you have a statue of Buddha in your house? Or one of the Hindu gods? They're quite cool, aren't they? Would you have books like this? This is something I picked up, Atheist's Guide to Christmas. It's quite good. Well, Simon Le Bon didn't realise he was an atheist. There you go. Well, there's other stuff like superstition. Some people are very superstitious, aren't they? Would you kind of be wary of things like that? Or even like this, a corn dolly, because a corn dolly, allegedly, has pagan origins. It probably does have pagan origins, or at least folk religion. This was, I'll tell, if you ever see me, ask me about the corn dolly. I'll tell you about the one who makes this, that was all into Mother Earth and stuff. And then she said about the winter, I go to Spain for the winter, it's too cold here. It's like, all right, Earth Mother. Superstitions. Would you preach at a pagan temple? Say someone said, oh, can you come and talk at this group? Would you go along, talk about it? Would you build a church on the site of a pagan temple? And there's theories that that's happened. Would you? Do you think? Would you be comfortable doing that? Would you fight for King Charles, defender of the faith, or defender of faith, isn't he now? Would you fight for Putin? That's a bit more controversial, isn't it now? Would you swear? Do you swear? Are you a swearing Christian? There is a type of Christian that's a swear. And if so, or would you swear in front of your family, or would you just do it on your own? Would you? How about something like this? The tarot. What would you do if someone handed you a tarot deck with all them? Is it they're early 20th century, aren't they? I think, or late 19th century. The tarot deck, based on a deck of cards, actually. Well, it was a deck of cards to start with. Would you pray a prayer that was written by a Muslim or a Sikh or a Hindu? I can't really say to the Christians, would you say a prayer that was written by a Jew, because we do it all the time when we use the Old Testament. Would you pray a prayer that was written by someone of a different faith or of no faith? What would you do? What of those things would you do? What wouldn't you do because you feel somehow it's tainted or not quite right? We'll get into the whys in a minute. Because the reading we've got, I'm going to read you a few excerpts from Corinthians, if I can find it. I should have found the page beforehand, shouldn't I? There goes my slick presentation, eh? In 1 Corinthians 8, the question keeps coming up regarding meat that's been offered up to an idol. Should you attend meals where such meat is served? Asks Paul. We sometimes tend to think we know all we need to know to answer these kinds of questions, but sometimes our humble hearts can help us more than our proud minds. We never really know enough until we recognise that God alone knows it all. Now, some people quite rightly say that idols have no actual existence. There's nothing to them. There is no God other than our one God, and no matter how many of these so-called gods are named and worshipped, they still don't add up to anything but a tall story. They say again quite rightly that there is only one God the Father, that everything comes from him, and that he wants us to live for him. And also they say there is only one Master, Jesus the Messiah, and that everything is for his sake, including us. Yes, it's true. And here's my sermon reel. I don't need to talk after this. In strict logic then, nothing happened to the meat when it was offered up to an idol. It's just like any other meat. I know that, and you know that. So the question is, because Christians do get cagey about stuff, don't we, is where does it get its power from? This stuff, or this stuff, or this stuff. Everything's upside down. Where, if anywhere, does it get its power from? So people get excited about what's seen as pagan. And I think, to be blunt, and I don't wish to disrespect people following those paths, a lot of what we think is paganism now is a really late invention, Victorian stuff, or even more recent, a lot of it. If you go into the bookshops now, a lot of that stuff is bits of history patched together. It's almost, and I'm happy to discuss this in real life with people, it's almost a Dan Brown thing, where they take a few facts and a bit of fiction and you weave it all together. And then you end up saying, well, this is clearly what happened. The Wheel of the Year, which is a pagan Wheel of the Year, was never a thing. It's been put together. And that doesn't mean it's not right and it doesn't contain truth, but it's not a thing that has existed before Jesus even came along. We can get on to the ancient gods perhaps at some time, and who is the ancient god. But people get excited about this kind of thing, as they do about other faiths. They get very excited or agitated about other faiths. And the question is, again and again, I think, where and do they have their power? Can they really steal my soul? Because I would argue that our faith actually is a rational thing. Doesn't always show, I know this. There's churches not a million miles from us that a few years ago were selling what in effect were magic handkerchiefs. They would pray over them and then they'd sell them or give them to people. This is blessed. And the churches, they do that with water, holy water. They bring holy water back from the Holy Land that's been blessed. Does it have any magical powers? But our faith is a rational one. In the Bible, I think, you get a reaction to this kind of superstition. There is a demythologizing of all this stuff that is nice, and there is an enchantment about it. There's an argument for re-enchanting the world, which I am actually in favour of. But if you look at the story of creation, you compare our story of creation as found in Genesis, you compare that with some of the old stories from other traditions and other cultures. There's dragons fighting and giants having their heads cut off and making domes in the sky. There's all that. Within Christianity and Judaism and Islam, you have God who speaks, and there it is. Which actually is far more rational than these gods fighting. And there we go. We'll make the dwarves out of the teeth, we'll. I know that's the Viking stuff, isn't it? Anyway, the point is, the Old Testament story is far more rational, and it takes away all this other stuff. And you get it through the Bible. You get it with Elijah and the prophets of Baal, where Elijah says, "Come on, get your God to do something now." Or is he taking a leak? Is he asleep? Where is he? You get it where the prophets say God doesn't want all these rituals and this magic and this ceremony. God wants justice. He wants fairness. He wants righteousness. You get it in the biblical canon. People go on about the books that didn't make it into the Bible, like, well, that's obviously hiding stuff. Well, actually, they didn't put a lot of this stuff in because it's insane. The Bible, compared to some of the stuff they didn't put in, is actually quite a reasonable document. There's Gospels. I don't know if it's Thomas or one of the other ones, the apocryphal Gospels they're called, because they're kind of apocryphal, does that mean hidden? I probably should have checked that one out. Anyway, so there's one where Jesus as a child is bringing birds back to life and stuff, and the people putting the Bible together thought, come on now, that's not right. That doesn't make any sense. Jesus talked about a practical faith. He didn't say you've got to do this and here's the ritual and here's how you do this. He says love people, serve God, seek God's justice, seek God's kingdom, live in the light. And even in the early days of the church, before the church and state got too carried away with their own powers, you had the church was scientific, as it was within early Islam. Some of the greatest scientific thinking came from within the church because they saw the wonder of creation and thought, how does this work? How does God done this? Where do these things get their power? And if you just want to finish watching it now, one of the most contemporary illustrations I could think of this, and if I remember this rightly, in The Labyrinth, the film The Labyrinth with David Bowie and the puppets. I can't remember the girl who plays the girl in it. When she destroys his power by realizing he has no power. You have no power over me. And it all falls away. And I think there's a truth in that. So what has power over you? What controls you? What things that aren't always rational, or don't seem to make sense, are controlling you? Just think about that. Well, thanks to the magic of television, we're able to time travel, because that sermon, that talk, was done in one go. So, but what we're going to do, we're going to put Corinthians back into its sequence. So we're going to jump to chapter 10 in a couple of sessions' time. So what I suggest you do is just make yourself a cup of tea and have a ponder over what 1 Corinthians 8 is. Perhaps read 1 Corinthians 8 again. And the next session, we'll be looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and then we'll come back and pick up this theme again.